welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens, and this is English Nerd. Hey, so it can be really overwhelming if you are interested in trying some classics. There are all those lists of 100 books you must read before you die and things like that. And I can see how that would just put me off from trying anything. Or perhaps you try one at random and then it's really confusing or or just not very good. I feel like all classics are definitely not created equal in any way. They're just books that have stood the test of time, that many people have found it worthwhile to go back to because there are layers that you can peel back and all of that. So I wanted to give you a short list of books that you might want to consider trying if you're interested in reading a few classics. So I've put them in different categories. I have other lists on this channel as well for some of the easiest ones to read, some of the shortest, etc. if you want to check those out. But this is a list of 5 books for beginners, those who are trying classics for the first time. Okay, so I want to start off with poetry. Poetry can be really intimidating, especially if you haven't really read much before. Honestly, outside of a classroom environment, I don't read a lot of poetry myself, but I'm glad that I have read some. I feel like it's been a benefit to me just in the way I think about words and things like that. So a longer poem that is one of the best for beginners because of how easy it is relative to a lot of other poems is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. There are definitely layers that you can pull back, but it's just a really fun, pretty easy to read yarn throughout the entire poem. So it is a classic, and it's one that I would definitely recommend for beginners. The next category is Russian literature. This is not everybody's cup of tea. It is very dark, very intense. I mean, if there was one word to describe Russian literature as I've understood it, it's intense. But there is definitely one work that I would recommend for anybody who is just trying this out to see if they can kind of understand the names and all of that. So again, for beginners, and that is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's not only important in a literary sense, it's important in a historical sense because this was one of the main ways that the West, America, etc., learned about the gulags in Russia and were able to begin to condemn those as a method of keeping their own citizens in chains. So it does describe the life of one day in the life of the main character, Ivan Denisovich, just a typical day, and it's written in a very straightforward fashion. There are some Russian names to get around, but it's not too much, especially if you have a list of names and you know kind of who are the most important players. That would be Ivan, Alyosha, Chirin, and probably 2 others. So yeah, give it a shot, and it's much shorter than your average Russian novel. So there you have it. Next up, I have The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Turns out I don't have a standalone copy of The Importance of Being Earnest as I was looking for one, which is shocking. So this is one of his other works, the Picture of Dorian Gray, which is also very good. But I'm recommending The Importance of Being Earnest for anybody who wants to try a classic play. I generally would not recommend Shakespeare as a first foray into classics. The Importance of Being Earnest is a classic. There are, again, layers to pull back about identity and things like that. But it's also just genuinely really funny. And it's understandable enough that you can read it and almost be able to see it as it's happening. I've heard people laughing aloud in study halls as they were reading the different scenes. So yeah, definitely recommend that if you want to try a play that is a classic. So we've looked at poetry, Russian literature, play. Let's look at some epics. Now, I'm using that loosely here. This is kind of epic adjacent. There are all these things that have to be in place for something to officially be considered an epic. It has to begin in the middle of things, etc., etc. But a lot of the qualities that you see in an epic work, you see in this particular Arthurian legend. So if you want to try something that's like an epic, something that's an Arthurian legend, then I would recommend Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The original writer is unknown. Burton Raffles' translation is fine. I would not go with Tolkien's translation. Sorry, man. I feel like it's just a little archaic. It's sort of like the King James Bible. There's no reason to be that archaic, but, for some reason, some people appreciate it. I prefer something that's a little bit simplified because the original is not super archaic itself. So it tells the story of Sir Gawain or Sir Gawain, depending on how correct you want to be. And he is a knight of the Round Table. He's a nephew to King Arthur, who's still a relatively young king at the beginning of this story. They're all having a Christmas feast when all of a sudden a Green Knight, who is huge, comes riding in to the hall into Camelot on a green horse, and he proposes that they play a Christmas game. The Christmas game turns out to be really dark and really threatening, and it's the adventure that takes place after Sir Gawain agrees to play this Christmas game. So it is written in poetry form in most translations. There are prose versions, but I get annoyed when something's a poem and they translate it as just paragraphs. But it's fairly simple, at least compared to other works of similar style. And then last, my final recommendation, if you don't want to try any of those types of works, no plays, no Russian literature, no poetry, I just want to read a classic novel, and that's it. It would be Lord of the Flies by William Golding. There are, of course, other ones that you could choose. I'm not saying you have to do this one, but it is, again, very understandable. It's not that hard to read, and this one you can tell right away that there's more going on underneath the surface, but you don't have to keep digging if you don't want to keep digging. Still, it makes you think, and it's an adventurous story about a group of boys who get stranded on a desert island and what they do to survive and the kinds of people that they choose to be while they're on that island. So it's a really interesting look into the psychology of just human beings in general. So you have some things to discuss with a book group, for example, while at the same time it's not all, the way that it's written is not also difficult to kind of peel back. So there you go. I have a novel, Arthurian legend, poem, play, and some Russian literature as well. So, what other recommendations would you make for a beginner reader of classics? Somebody who wants to try out, the quote-unquote canon and see what they think about some of these works. Put your own recommendations down below. I'd love to hear them. Until next week, I'll see you next time. Bye.